following program is from WNET 13.
Black Journal is an on-the-air magazine reporting on the personalities, ideas, and issues that affect Black America. It attempts to achieve balance by reporting from a Black perspective.
This season, we're offering you free this Black Journal magazine, filled with articles about our programming and philosophy, ideas of leading Blacks, and many more interesting features. For a souvenir copy, send your name and address and 50 cents in postage stamps. Do not send cash. To Black Journal, Department M, 10 Columbus Circle, New York, New York. Black Journal, 10 Columbus Circle, New York.
The Lord was very kind to send you, to get you up this morning. I know that's a hard job in itself, and it took the Lord to do it. But we're glad he did it and that he got you here. Now, the only thing you got to do is when we sing an invitational hymn is to find your way to that aisle and come on down. Now, don't be messing around back there trying to make up your mind. You ain't got no mind to make up. The white man messed that up long time ago. All right, so let's come on down.
The introduction of Christianity to the African slaves and its subsequent acceptance can be examined on various levels to understand Christianity as an integral part of our culture. Slave masters used Christianity as a pacifier. It taught non-resistance, passive obedience, and a way of life free of pain and misery after death. The slave, soon realizing that he was in a white man's world, stripped of all his roots and religious traditions, embraced Christianity, basically because it was something that the white man did that he could do also. The acceptance of the Christian ethic can be said to be the most significant factor in the movement away from Africa to the white Christian way of life. The Black church has grown to become a major institution in Black American life. Despite the presence of this potential power base, many Black churches continue to work within a white structure and restrict their work to traditional religious activities. This has led to dissent, particularly among the young Black parishioners, who are demanding the church's involvement in social reforms and feel that they are unresponsive to the real needs of the Black community. In some instances, Black clergy are beginning to reject the traditional concepts of the Christian doctrine and are seeking to reinterpret religion to fit the intensified feelings of Black consciousness, of functional Black theology for the Black church. The Shrine of the Black Madonna in Detroit espouses a new philosophy, paving a totally new direction for the Black church, Black Christian nationalism. The Reverend Albert Clegg, pastor of the Shrine, advocates a rejection of the traditional concepts of the church, and in its place, the building of a Black liberation movement which derives its basic insights from African communalism and its revolutionary direction from Jesus as a Black Messiah.
Well, the Black church is really, has not been Black. It's been a white church that's been functioning in the Black community, ministering to Black people, but from a white point of view. The Black church, the Negro church, has had a white Jesus, a white God, a white interpretation of history, a white biblical interpretation, a total misconception of the basic beginnings of Christianity. Christianity really began in Africa with the Black nation Israel. The nation Israel came into being in Africa and was an African nation. 70 people from the original nation Israel went into Egypt, and they became the nation Israel, which finally escaped from bondage in Egypt about 700 years later, as about 2 million or 3 million people. So the whole nation really had come into being in Africa. And the basic characters that we read about in the Old Testament are essentially Africans. The nation Israel was an African nation. Now, the failure to understand this, of course, has made it impossible for the black church to meaningfully deal with the Old Testament. They've dealt with it always as a story of God's deliverance, but always thinking of the nation Israel as a white nation. And if the nation Israel was a white nation, then of course Jesus would be a white Messiah, the mother Jesus would be a white mother, and the whole conglomeration, then the spiritual hierarchy was white. And so a black man, in participating in a Negro church, reinforced his sense of inferiority. By going into a church on Sunday and bowing down to a white God and worshiping a white Jesus, he destroyed the possibility of really understanding his relationship with God or his responsibility to black people.
Members seeking to become ministers of black Christian nationalism enter the ministerial group program. Theology classes emphasize a relationship between the Bible and black people.
Still the same problem, but we can't look at the prophecy of old and say that the prophecy applied to us. This is another characteristic of black people, and this is connected with the euphoria, an exaggerated sense of well-being, to act as if things are one way and things are another way. The prophecy of old applied to the people of old. The prophecy that Moses dealt with applied to him and those people in the wilderness. The prophecy of Jeremiah applied to the particular period of history that he dealt with. Now, we cannot look back and think about this prophecy as being particularly applied to our situation. That's right. They're true for us because they were eternal truths. It's true that if you have a group together, they're stronger than an individual. That's right. It's true that if you have a group together that love each other, that they're capable of putting together organization with discipline. They're capable of putting together a kind of philosophy that leads to power. So we say then the prophets were dealing with eternal truths that we can abstract and apply to our situation. So when we say then that nothing is more sacred than the liberation of black people, what we're talking about...
The Bible is strongly emphasized as a tool to be used in present-day situations.
But the black experience is the starting point. Everything we do has to be interpreted and defined in terms of the black experience. That's the measurement stick. Whatever is bad is not applicable to the black experience. It's not applicable to our efforts to build a nation. If it's good, then it's applicable. So we say then that the Bible is simply a tool that we use to try to overcome all of the diseases that we have inherited from white people.
Black Christian nationalist philosophy has met resistance in many theological circles because it consequently rejects traditional Christian doctrine. It has its own concept of the spiritual life and maintains that a black church for black people is as valid and necessary as a white church for white people.
Jesus built on the teachings of the Old Testament, the chosen people, the sense of relationship as a group with God and all the rest. The Apostle Paul was an Uncle Tom black Jew, with which we're very familiar today, who identified with the white oppressor. And he prided himself on his Roman citizenship. And when he had a sunstroke on the Damascus Road and said he'd been converted, he'd never seen Jesus, never talked to Jesus, didn't know anything about the things that Jesus had done. But he wanted to make his new faith in Jesus something that was compatible to the pagan, heathen, Gentile world, the white world. And so he took Jesus, who had been a revolutionary leader, and made him an atonement symbol nailed to a cross, and said the significance of Jesus was Jesus on the cross, not the work that Jesus had done as a revolutionary leader, as a zealot, as a person who was fighting for liberation. And so Paul distorted the teachings of Jesus totally, because he wasn't concerned with anything Jesus taught. He just said through the mystery of Jesus nailed to the cross on Calvary, God had somehow delivered mankind from sin. And so he distorted and destroyed basically the teachings of Jesus. But Paul was a great organizer and organized churches and passed on his distortion. And the basic teachings of Jesus were left to the little group of disciples who still met in Jerusalem. And they lost in the final analysis with the destruction of Jerusalem and the fall of the fort of Masada. And Paul's continued ministry to the Gentiles eventually became the church at Rome. And even the church at Rome was, at the beginning, entirely dependent upon the African leaders of the church. And St. Augustine and three of the early popes were all Africans who moved to Rome to work in the church. But essentially, Paul destroyed the meaning of the church because Jesus was a revolutionary leader fighting for a worldly position for the nation Israel, for emancipation, liberation for a nation. And Paul was talking about a otherworldly escape from the problems of life and going to heaven. So most black churches are now preaching the otherworldly escape that Paul taught, which had nothing whatsoever to do with the teachings of Jesus, the black Messiah.
The Black Madonna has historical as well as symbolic significance to its congregation.
The Black Madonna merely symbolizes the mother of Jesus, but it has a greater significance for us as black people in that it tends not only to represent the mother of Jesus, but the great contribution that black women have made to the struggle of black people for liberation down through the ages. We pay tribute to black women and the heroism of black women who have maintained the black home and who have held together black people at a time when we tended to be fragmented by our desire to be identified with white people and the confusion which was incidental to our powerlessness and to our exploitation. And so we say, in referring to the Black Madonna, we refer to the whole traditions of black people and the fact that black women were very important in holding black people together during these trying times.
To the sea, where we go, and for this cause we came into the world, that
We worship, we tend to be emotional, we become a part of a group experience very easily. Music is for us very important. We use music realistically. We sing gospel songs. We sing music that has rhythm, that comes out of the black experience. We do all of the things in worship that are part of the black experience and try to eliminate the formalism and the hypocrisy which goes into the ordinary white service of worship or the pseudo-white service of worship that's done in black churches. So the music is important because we feel that black people to submerge or to sacrifice individualism have to have a genuine group experience. think black Christian nationalism can be most easily defined in terms of the basic premise upon which the movement came into being. That is, nothing is more sacred than the liberation of black people. We seek then to restructure the theology, the history, the biblical interpretation, the organizational structure of the church. Everything that has gone into the building of the black church, we seek to restructure in terms of making the church central in the liberation movement. So in every respect, Christianity really